LUTs were an absolute mystery to me when I started learning color grading. Sometimes they would work and sometimes they looked like trash. It felt like a game of chance, and for a while I avoided them altogether. A lot of you seem to feel the same way. So I think it's time to end this. LUTs are one of the most powerful and yet one of the most misunderstood tools in color grading. Learning how to properly use them will not only save you hours, but will also help you achieve a much greater level of consistency. The cherry on top of what I'm about to show you is it allows you to focus on the creative aspect of color grading to enhance your storytelling, rather than just trying to make things work. Meaning, if you understand and implement the 3 things I'm about to show you, you're winning threefold. By the way, the asterisk on everything in the thumbnail is there because I found you only need to understand 3 key things to make LUTs work for you every single time. A lot of seemingly random and strange behavior of LUTs suddenly makes sense when you understand the first thing. The term LUT is an acronym for lookup table. This means it is just a table storing color values Final Cut Pro can look up. That's the theory, but in practice there's a little bit more to that. If you open a LUT with a text editor, like so, you can see it is just a table with 3 columns. These columns are actually dimensions, so we're looking at a 3-dimensional table. One color value consists of a red, green, and blue component, hence a 3-dimensional LUT, because we need 3 coordinates to describe one color value. The 3 dimensions we need are of course red, green, and blue. Even though this insight is quite powerful on its own, it doesn't explain anything yet. Furthermore, if LUTs are 3-dimensional, it would be way more intuitive to look at them 3-dimensional. I move our text edit window to the side and open the LUT with lattice. Don't worry, you don't need the software, this is just for demonstration. When looking at the cube representation, you can see why we need 3 dimensions. Because as discussed earlier, we have 3 primary colors. There's a dimension for red, a dimension for green, and a dimension for blue. Let's zoom in a little bit. And you can see each dimension goes from black to the fully saturated hue, like green, from black to red, and from black to blue. To describe a point in 3-dimensional space, we need 3 coordinates, a width, a depth, and a height. Just like in the real world, you need the address of a house, which takes care of the width and the depth, but you also need to know the floor in order to accurately communicate where you are. In the case of a LUT, this refers to red, green, and blue. Let's go back here and take this point for example. I zoom in a little bit more, like so, and you can see this point is black, which means the coordinates would be 0, 0, 0. And if I take the text edit window and pull it over here, you can see, sure enough, this point exists, 0, 0, 0. This is the first part of the equation. The second part is what actually happens inside the LUT. Buckle up. I move the text edit window out of the way again, and I make lattice a little bit bigger so we can see what's actually going on. As you can see, the cube is filled with a 3-dimensional grid. These points represent the colors. The LUT's job is to map one color to another. Therefore, for every value, so to speak for every point, there must be a second value, because again, a LUT maps one color value to another. In order to do that, Final Cut Pro or whatever application using the LUT needs to look up the input value of a color and the output value of a color. You can think of it as Final Cut Pro asking the LUT, I have a color, for example, 0, 0, 0, where should it go? And the LUT says 0, 0, 0 remains 0, 0, 0, meaning black stays black. Or I have a color, point 16, point 54 and point 75. Where should this go? And the LUT says this color is now point 2, point 6 and point 8. Essentially, this is what's being looked up. I have an input color, where should it go? And the LUT stores this information. A LUT doesn't know or care about anything else. I really want to drive the point home. LUTs do not adapt to anything and they don't know anything. They just say this value is now this value. To visualize this a little bit better, let's have a look at the cube representation. I rotate the cube so we have a good picture of what's going on. And now let's have a look. we have these colors, and these colors need to go there. Again, these values are now these values. These colors go there. It's nothing more than that. Knowing how LUTs work now helps us to understand why they sometimes work and sometimes don't. It all depends on the correct input, because again, the LUT doesn't know anything and it doesn't react to anything. It is built for a given input, and everything depends on you giving the LUT the correct input. Before we can talk about how to achieve the correct input, we need to have a look at the second key factor. Understanding this second key factor will help you knowing what needs to be done in order to achieve the correct input. We need to keep in mind that LUTs are used for many different purposes. For example, some LUTs perform a color space transformation, whereas other LUTs don't do this. To make sure you can give each LUT the input it requires, you need to imagine a spectrum from objective to subjective. Back to pen and paper. As I just mentioned, we need to imagine a spectrum from objective to subjective. This means we can put down technical LUTs here and creative LUTs here. Arguably, the most objective technical LUTs are what I call utility LUTs. These LUTs only have one purpose. For example, a false color LUT only exists to accurately indicate exposure. Then let's put down utility LUTs here. Next up, we have another kind of technical LUT, the color space transformation LUT. Their only purpose is to go from one color space to another. Usually, they transform your footage from an acquisition color space, for example, like slog3 asgamut3.cine, to a reproduction color space or display color space like rec709. On the other hand of the spectrum, we have creative LUTs. They do not perform any kind of color space transformation, and their job isn't to be objective. You choose a creative LUT as a shortcut to a certain look. However, you need to be very careful with creative LUTs because they vary in quality quite a lot, to say the least. My rule of thumb for creative LUTs is if you know your primary grade is in check and you would need to make a lot of changes in order to use a particular creative LUT, scrap it and move on to the next one, or just create the look on your own. You will otherwise create more problems than you solve. Okay, back to the classification of the LUTs. Now we have a lot of space in the middle here, and this is where technical LUTs meet creative LUTs. I call them mixed LUTs. These mixed LUTs perform a technical color space transformation, but also have some kind of bias to them. Depending on how strong their bias is, they are leaning towards the subjective part of the spectrum or the more objective part of the spectrum. Popular examples for mixed LUTs would be the phantom LUTs or the leaming LUTs. Here's where everything comes together now. If we look at this system, depending on your experience, you might see a connection to another property, up here. This property is the workflow stage. On the left, there's the actual recording of your footage. You might use a false color LUT to indicate exposure during filming. Then we have color correction. Color correction deals with normalization, shot matching, and balancing. Though there can be some creative decisions made, it's still rather objective. During this stage, you also perform the color space transformation, which is rather objective in and of itself. Here you have your color space transformation. Depending on your project, you might use a color space transformation LUT or one of the mixed LUTs to get you closer towards your end goal. And way towards the right end of the spectrum, we have all the secondary color corrections, so I write down secondaries, and all kinds of stylization. This is where a creative LUT would come into play. With this system, everything should become very clear now. If you're concerned with color correction, shot matching, or balancing, a creative LUT has absolutely no business being there, period. Because if you follow a sound workflow, the correct inputs for the LUTs will emerge from what we're doing. Remember, it's all about creating the correct input for the LUTs. Color correction in and of itself takes care of preparing your footage for the color space transformation. Meaning during color correction, you create the correct input for the color space transformation. The color space transformation then converts your footage to, let's say, rec709. And your creative LUT may require rec709 as an input. As you can see, everything will magically fall into place. Today, we learned that LUTs are three-dimensional tables that map one color value to another. We also discovered that there is no magic in sight. They don't react to anything and they don't know anything. Which means it all depends on you giving the LUT the correct input. Achieving the correct inputs is the name of the game when working with LUTs. Also, there are different kinds of LUTs which require different inputs. However, if you follow a correct workflow, you will produce these correct inputs as a consequence of the correct workflow. Knowing where to start and systematically tightening down the moving parts of the equation one by one is the first and probably most impactful step you can take if you truly want to become better at color grading. If you feel ready to do this, I have a link in the video description. If you want to learn the one thing you can do today to make LUTs work for you, you should watch this video next.